All right. Well, good evening, everyone. This is a presentation on the Southern Marin Fire District's drone responder, first responder drone program. My name is Marshall now. I work for the Southern Marin Fire District as a fire inspector, but currently I'm also the UAS drone program lead. And this is the first of very likely many, but at least the first of a series of two presentations to the public to where we are trying to do some public outreach and educate everyone in our community about the drone program that Southern Marin Fire District is implementing across our district. For a brief overview of the program that we're talking about tonight is a few things. I apologize, I have to kind of move a few things around on my screen so I can see what I'm doing. But the first segment of it is going to be pretty heavy on our policies and procedures. I'll explain why that is shortly, but that's definitely going to be the first portion. Might be a little dry, but I really want to make sure we cover that. But then we're going to go into our public outreach efforts, including all of our training and launch sites that we plan on using, and then focus in on one of the most critical portions for us, but that's our transparency element to the public, so they're aware of what we're doing. And then wrap it up talking primarily about the use cases that Southern Marin Fire District intends on using the drone platform for within our community. Now, before we get too deep into each one of these topics, I want to cover a few terms that are very important for the community to understand around drones and drone technology. There's a lot of terms, a lot of acronyms out there. I'm going to focus on a few that are going to help this presentation have a little bit more understanding and meaning. The first one is the difference between a UAS, a UAV, and a drone. Realistically, these terms can all be used interchangeably. A UAS stands for an unmanned aircraft system, whereas a UAV is an unmanned aerial vehicle. But at the end of the day, these all mean the same thing. We're talking about a drone or a piece of equipment that's capable of flying in the air without a human inside. There's some sort of remote pilot on the ground controlling the operations of that vehicle. So throughout this presentation, we'll say UAS, UAV, or drone. They're all synonymous. They all mean the same thing in this circumstance. But when we come down to our mission, this is anything whenever we deploy our drones specifically, that's what we're referring to as a mission. It could be a training mission, or it could be an actual first responder deployment or mission of that caliber. We'll talk a little bit about that, but the reason why I call out mission specifically is because of the requirements within our documentation and policy to track all of our missions. And then mission critical are elements of the mission that are required for that flight to actually take place. And we'll go into that when we talk about training. Now, the FAA, many probably have heard this in the news or are familiar with what the FAA is, but for those that are not familiar with aviation or airspace, the Federal Aviation Administration is the federal element that regulates everything that takes place in the airspace, which is just as it sounds, the space above our heads throughout the entire United States. It's all classified as different types of airspace. This is how airplanes don't regularly crash into each other. The FAA sets the requirements within this, and that's important because we also have to play by those same exact rules. And how we do that specifically within our agency is under what's called COA. And that COA is a certification that we get from the FAA that gives us the temporary authorization. Now it's typically in place and lasts for 2 years, but it does clarify specifically what we're able to do. And I'll go into a little detail about that COA. And by the end of this presentation, we'll all have heard me say COA more times than I'd like to admit. And then lastly is just a little bit of branding that is being done across the board with the drone platforms throughout the country. And that's this first responder drone concept, or FRD. And I'll talk about that, but we're trying to differentiate the concept of using a drone for surveillance tactics versus fire and life safety tactics. Our intent here is to bring forward that first responder element. With that said, that's the first thing I want to talk about tonight is the first responder drone program that we're launching here in Southern Marin Fire. So right now, advancing technology is allowing us to be able to utilize drone technology, as well as other technologies that can be equipped on these drones, like LiDAR and thermal imaging, to benefit our crews and our first responders on the ground. Whether it's fire suppression or post-suppression, like investigative purposes, these tools become paramount for the fire district. And this is not just Southern Marin Fire District, but CAL FIRE and all other agencies throughout California are starting to look and implement these additional resources that technology has to provide for us to help keep our first responders safe, as well as keep our community safe. And then obviously Southern Marin Fire, Marin County in general, we have some challenging topography. The limitations to our district provide for an aerial asset to be just that, a very beneficial tool within our toolbox to be able to deploy depending on the circumstances. And as technology advances, this first responder drone program becomes a huge component of that. So like I said, COA is going to be one of those terms that I say quite a bit tonight. Hopefully I can get through the majority of the presentation without boring anyone hearing about COA, but I do have to take the time to step back on what the FAA is and how it regulates the district through that COA. Like I said, it's only good for 2 years, and that COA stipulates a lot of different guidelines as far as where we can fly, how high we can fly, what type of training and requirements are required for us to be able to move about. But as the FAA advances forward with drone regulation, the fire districts, as well as other local agencies, have to make sure that we are able to abide by these requirements. And that's where we have to become partners with the FAA to make sure that we follow their guidelines. They're the starting place for all of our aviation requirements. We operate boats and fire engines and all sorts of equipment that require robust training and certifications. But I have to say, I think, and some of our firefighters and medics may argue with me a little bit, but I think the drone program will be one of our most heavily reviewed and watched programs due to the regulations the FAA requires, as far as the monthly reporting that we have to do out to them on all of our mission logs. But I'll talk about that in a little bit on another slide. So like I said, I'm going to be going in depth on COA. This portion is talking about the policies and procedures within that COA and what we have to do. I've touched on a few of these already, but there's 2 different versions of a COA, and I don't want to go too much in deep detail on what this is. But what this does is this defines the boundaries of where we're able to fly, whether it's within the Southern Marin Fire District, or if we can extend that mission, depending on its criteria, further through waivers or other elements to maybe the county boundaries or beyond, if we need to deploy out to assist other agencies throughout the state or country potentially. So this is we're integrating all the options in as we train up our pilots and make sure that we can define where we can fly through what these COAs have, and then utilizing technology to help us track all of the flight mission logs for these devices. And FAA wants to do much more than just when we flew. They want to know how high, how long, what specific battery was being used. There's quite a bit of detail that they expect to be able to track. And we've actually partnered with a company that we're using a platform that's the same one that CAL FIRE uses to track all of their flight logs and technologies. And they make this tracking seamless. And the benefit is that we can also make that available to the public as long as those missions are not within some sort of fire investigation. But I'll talk about that towards the end. So finally, the policies and procedures really become the foundational element for this entire program, with proper oversight from chief officers and other observers in the field, ensuring that we fly these drones properly and safely is consistent. And our message to the public is that that is our primary objective. These are tools to help us prevent fire and life safety issues, but at the same time, we have to make sure that our pilots and our staff are trained appropriately. With that, there's regular mandatory training for all the pilots that are engaged in the program, and all of the pilots are sworn officers within the Southern Marin Fire District. So some agencies utilize their drone program to allow volunteers to fly. That's not something we're looking at doing. It's not something that we're interested in doing. Some programs fly strictly Part 107 type pilots, which makes it harder to maintain that proper mandatory training for all their personnel. And that's also something that we're not trying to do. And then at the end of the day, documentation, if you haven't picked up on that yet, is critical to us. We have to make sure that everything is documented, both to abide by the FAA guidelines, but also ensure that the public is able to see where we're flying and when we're flying. So with that, one concept that we want to make sure we highlight is our frequency of flying. With a robust program like this, it does require regular flight training. This does not have to be aerial. It could just be surface level or above ground, but we do need to inspect and test our drones to ensure that they're flying properly and safely before we deploy them into the air. That's stipulated in our COA. And typically those sites would be our fire stations. Now, as this program evolves and different components with technology evolve, future public information will be provided. But at this point in time, our intent is to fly these primarily at our fire stations, primarily our training facilities, ensure all of our pilots have the opportunity to do competency training, which is where you deploy a drone at a very low level and perform a series of maneuvers to maintain competency of the functionality of that drone. And then integrating these into some other operations such as water training or field training. But I'll get into that when I talk about some of our use cases. Some of these training requirements I have already discussed. Initially, all entry-level pilots within our program are taking a robust, both in-person, lecture-based, and hands-on drone operation course, which is a basic UAS program, which allows them to have good understanding and functionality of both the drone platform itself, kind of do's and don'ts, as well as the FAA requirements for a pilot to operate. Now, Part 107 is a licensed pilot. Now, it's licensed for unmanned aerial vehicles or UAS or UAVs, but it is still a licensed pilot certification. Some of our pilots will probably have these Part 107s, but a robust team of 10 to 20 individuals working under a COA, the benefit there is we don't have to have all of them Part 107 trained, but that basic training is an in-person level of that Part 107. So they still get all the same skills that a Part 107 pilot has. They just don't have to carry the license. All that equates to is when they leave the district, when they go home at the end of the night or the end of their shift, they are no longer a pilot at home. They're only a pilot within the parameters of flying our drones under our COA, if that makes sense there. But we want to make sure that all of the skills that we've incorporated on, and NIST is a platform that determines the competency and requirements to maintain that competency for a drone pilot. So those are things that we're incorporating into our regular training and evaluating. And then that software that I mentioned, it helps us to both track and monitor the maintenance of our equipment, as well as the training requirements and attendance of all of our pilots, easily reported out to the FAA or to the public if requested. And then finally, on some of our policy and everything else that we're talking about, sorry, my screen is getting very crowded here, is the testing and evaluation of all this. Initially, all of our pilots come on and they go through that training, and it's very typical of the fire service. They receive what we call a task book, which walks them through step by step all those skills that they need to demonstrate and achieve to be a competent pilot. And then from there, we're able to put them into situations and start utilizing these for actual missions. But one of the biggest takeaways is that they also understand the thresholds of when a mission is compromised, and that either has to be canceled before the flight even takes place, or the drone has to return back to home. So this is just giving you, again, a broad overview of the levels of policy, skill, training, and regulation that this drone program has integrated into the entire thing. Ooh, I lost control of my slide. But The main priority that we have here are two things: public perception and what we're doing to get out to the public and making sure they understand what we're doing, and then our use cases that I'll talk about next. Our pledge here is consistent, that community outreach is paramount. And it's not just education on what Southern Marin Fire District is doing, but we become a key resource in the community regarding drones in general. We can bring the education to the public about what drones are and how they can benefit us, but also what to look out for. We can engage with local aviation in our area, whether it's private drone, hobbyists, or local aircraft, like what we have on the water that's doing seaplane tours or helicopter tours. Because if the FAA is setting these regulations and seeing drones as such a hazard that they have to enforce more and more regulations, then naturally there is a threat there for drones to be out in our community. And it's going to come down to responsible and safe drone pilots. The FAA recently released their trust certification for the hobbyist level. So if you don't want to become a pilot and actually have your pilot's license, but you still want to operate a drone safely in the public space, you can take a trust course for free online and get that certification. We can bring that education to schools or to the public to make sure that they're aware of what they have available to them, and then make sure that we have safe pilots out there. But we can also take it a step further and educate law enforcement on the proper and safe techniques to question pilots that they see in the field. Because the FAA sees these drones as a hazard to other to manned flight in the area around us, and also obviously the public and pedestrians, it's important that if we have law enforcement approaching pilots that are found at parks or anywhere else, whether legal or illegal, that we approach them appropriately and bring that drone down to the ground safely to avoid any sort of life safety incident. So again, becoming partners within our community and educating everyone on all the different layers that are coming down with FAA requirements around drones. It's no longer that $20 toy that you buy at the supermarket and fly in your living room. People are having drones readily available to them, shipped from all over the world, and they are out there. So we want to be that asset to the community and bring a little bit more knowledge around drones beyond just what we're doing. The best way to do that is to be responsible drone pilots ourselves. And then obviously keeping our finger and understanding on how the community feels about drones and the privacy concerns that surround drones in our community. With that, one of the mission critical things that I see in this program, but kind of resembles what Southern Marin Fire District does in general, is bring a level of transparency to what we are doing as a fire district. It's a key element. I show our website right there within our current website. And very soon we'll be hosting a platform to where we can integrate all of our UAV or UAS drone program information onto one central location. So if you are interested in this topic or you're concerned about this topic, you can keep in on with us and see where we're at with our progression. Currently, we're not flying any drones and we are not scheduling any missions because we're in the process of renewing our COA in order to remain compliant with all the new FAA regulations. But that's why these meetings and presentations to the public are so timely. And then with that, we'll be able to release past mission logs as we release them to the FAA, as well as potentially releasing upcoming missions that we have planned if we're doing some sort of training activity. The goal is to be able to provide the public with a better understanding of what we are and where we're at, so there's no mystery behind what we're doing. And to bring it to the kind of the meat of this entire presentation, I know I've droned on and on about policy and procedure, but it's our use cases. Where is Southern Marin actually planning on implementing utilization of these drones, of that the eye in the sky? And that's based around some very key use cases, primarily search and rescue and fire investigation. Before I get into these, right off the bat, we're not intending on using them for fire inspections. There's no way that we're trying to bring forward regulation from the fire code through the use of a drone. That's not the intent. The intent is to utilize these for people who need that fire and life safety element. So search and rescue in either open water on the bay or in the coast, along the coastline or along the cliff line for people that need rescue there, and then search and rescue out in the open space. Obviously, we've got federal and local partners that have vast amount of open space surrounding our district. And this is a tool that will assist our personnel in hopefully searching and rescuing and finding individuals in any one of these elements. The drones themselves, technology is advancing, and there's probably more stuff coming down the line. But right now, some of the technologies that are available to us to equip on our drone are things like speakers and lights, not just cameras, but LiDAR and thermal imaging. All of these resources are different lenses that we can put on to see different things while we're assisting. The platform that we're using now will allow us to be able to in real time track where we are in relationship to our first responders if we set that up. And so we can better assist walking and guiding rescuers towards what we're looking for based on the drone's GPS location and the first responders GPS location. So search and rescue becomes a huge critical element, as well as fire investigation. Both NFPA 921, 1033 call out in multiple places have the benefits of advancing technology through LiDAR, thermal imaging, and cameras for both structural and wildfires. And that having that visual bird eye approach is extremely beneficial for data collection and accuracy in determining the cause and origin of a said fire. So fire investigation is probably a huge tool that we'll be able to benefit from. And then last, and probably least to be used, but definitely beneficial, would be able to better capture and track our projects within the vegetation's world. So tracking tree removal or fuel breaks along those lines, and getting a better understanding of how we're transitioning the landscape to adapt to that wildfire presence. There are other use cases out there, but these are our primary focus as we get this program up and running. And then our plan is to have our primary use cases posted on that portal, so you can keep up on what Southern Marin is intending to use these type of drone platforms for, and track our progress in how we evolve with this program. And before I take questions and answers on the topic, I want to wrap up by saying we are currently members with Drone Responder, which is a nonprofit organization that's very robust to the country right now. They've got the ear of the FAA, and they're partnering with them. And their goal is really to build this resiliency around drone use and technology for first responders, both law enforcement and fire departments across the country, and bring this technology to the forefront for these agencies to highlight the benefit of having trained pilots within your organization as a tool to help safeguard and protect both those first responders as well as our community, and keep that technology at the forefront to, like I said, build that resilience within the agency. So with that, I want to take questions. We don't have a ton of people, so I don't have to worry about too many ground rules, but I just want to lay this out there. If you don't feel comfortable speaking, feel free to type something in the chat. And then otherwise, you can either raise your hand. We don't have too many people, so we don't have a real big risk of people talking over each other, but I want to give everyone a chance to communicate and speak directly to me or to the fire district. And then I'm happy to take this information. We're very much in the gathering stage of getting information back from the community to better tailor our program to the needs and requests of the community, if there are any. So let me see if I can get this to a screen where I can see everyone. So like I said, I think there's only about 4 people joining us today, which is not the end of the world. We have another one coming. Is there anyone at this time that has any questions? Again, it's a very high level overview of the program, really focusing on where we're taking it. My hope is annually, if not quarterly, we come out and do some more of these presentations to update everyone with where we're at. Thank you for the kind comments in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions. Well, with that, I'm going to stop the recording here. If I can, there we go.